Good morning, guys. Good morning. Everyone hear me okay? Sound good? Signal good? Connection good? Excuse me, I was out foraging this morning and I'm literally covered in blossom and leaves. So if I look like I've been dragged through a hedge backwards, it's because I kind of have. So apologies if I'm covered in stuff. I hope everyone's well this morning. I hope everyone's having a good start to the day and looking forward to a lovely bank holiday weekend. Um, So today, like I said on Monday, we were always going to get this in at some point, whether it was this week or one of next week's bonus sessions, because in stepping into that role of a home herbalist and a herbal forager, and if you're moving into that village herbalist model, pain killing, knowing how to manage pain is one of the most common things that we'll be doing. I think about the forage remedies that I use most often in anger, whether it's people asking me or my family, friends, whatever. It's painkillers are one of the most common by a long way. Um, so I want to talk about just a phenomenally effective, clinically proven painkiller in willow bark, for facilitating that, which is a really good one to know about. I also wanted to say a massive thank you and welcome to everyone who's joined the Wild Medicine Mastery course. We've had a phenomenal number of people sign up in the last 24 hours. Which is so amazing. I can't wait to get to know you all better. Obviously, it'll be a smaller group, and I can't wait to really use this as an opportunity to progress through the calendar year from now until November, really, and just looking at how we maximize every single month, every single herb, to build just an extensive array of remedies and medicines, and knowing how to use them properly. Because once you've got that knowledge, yes, you obviously get lifetime access to it in the course, but it's then just a case of building upon that year on year. Massive welcome to everyone who has joined. And if you are looking to continue into the wonderful world of foraging and herbal medicine, obviously I'd love to have you join and welcome you into that. We've got our first live session of that course next Wednesday, where we're looking at the herbal priorities for May. We're looking at elderflowers. We're looking at some cold and flu prepping for the coming cold and flu season. And also for everyone who has joined, stay tuned for an amazing culinary foraged recipe bundle dropping tomorrow, which has got things like wild Greek, wilted green recipes. I've got a list here. Well, I'll let you know later on today, but there's an amazing recipe bundle dropping tomorrow. So it's got, Greek inspired wilted greens. It's got fermented dandelion probiotic sauerkraut. It's got dandelion mustard and wildflower honey. It's got mineral rich dandelion finishing salt. It's got a dandelion and wild garlic pesto. So just loads of culinary applications which still fulfill the role of medicine, but in a culinary form rather than just in a medicinal form. So they'll be uploaded to the web platform either later this afternoon or by tomorrow. Okay, so do keep your eye out for that. The Greek inspired wilted greens are a revelation. We had them loads when we were traveling in the camper van in Greece and Croatia. Just it transformed my understanding of how to use greens. That it's a beautiful simple recipe, so do check that out. Right, so today, why is talking about herbal painkillers so important? It's so important because over-the-counter OTC, painkillers, Nurofen, ibuprofen, paracetamol, aspirin are the most used medicines globally, which by inference, if they're the most used medicine, obviously means that the percentage of our family, community, work, school, country, whatever cohort you want to look at, it means that a phenomenal percentage of those people are living or managing pain-based conditions, whether they're chronic or whether they're acute. whether it's ongoing arthritic pain, whether it's cyclical tension headaches, whether it's monthly pain with the menstrual cycle, whether it's sports injuries. It goes on and on and on and on. So the fact that these medicines are used so much, the fact that living and managing with pain is such a common problem, it obviously becomes of central importance for the herbal forager, for the home herbalist, for the village herbalist to know how to manage that effectively in a safe, evidence-based way. Um, and it's not, this doesn't come without risk. And I think this is one of the things that is, and it astonishes me that this isn't propagated more in the media and in the in the news, because we think of over-the-counter painkillers, Nurofen, paracetamol, ibuprofen, aspirin. We think of them as just being these really safe medicines that we can take without having to really worry about it. But that's not how they were designed for use. Particularly ibuprofen, it was designed for very, very short periods of use at a much lower dose, actually. And the research shows that not only are more people using painkillers on a regular basis, they're using them for too long, days and days and days and days, often weeks, and they're using them at too high a dose. So, for example, particularly ibuprofen, 3,000 milligrams a day for more than a couple of days has been shown to induce clinically significant toxicity to the liver. And I know so many people who are doing that regularly. I've got friends with bad sports injuries who are still playing competitive sport, who are using this to allow them to train. I know people who get really bad tension headaches who use this, as a preventative. It goes on and on and on and on. So this isn't the um take them at will, no problem, no risk dosing that we are led to believe. These are risky, they come with side effects. We're using them too much, too often, at too high a dose. We need to find alternatives to these. We need to find really effective options. And if we keep on coming back to that framework that we spoke about on Monday, why forage? What problem does it solve? We keep on coming back to these three objectives: transforming and optimizing physical health, mental health, vitality, youthfulness, disease prevention, reducing our disease risk factors, optimizing our longevity profile. Those two objectives we've covered extensively on the previous four sessions. That's been the priority, preventing heart disease, reducing the risk of cancer and Alzheimer's. All of these kinds of things we've covered. Today moves very much into that third priority, which is how do we manage common household ailments? How do we manage, colds and flus and pain and, the whole range of things? And understanding herbal painkillers is absolutely front and center there, alongside other. When we think about managing common household ailments, what are the culprits that we're most likely to manage? If I think about my household, my family, friends, family, whatever it is, what is it? It's infections, it's cold and flus, it's broken sleep, it's stress, it's anxiety, it's gut problems, it's pain problems. These are the things we need to know how to manage, which is great because there are herbs growing all through the year that are clinically proven to manage those things. So a herb we're going to talk about in detail in the Wild Medicine Mastery on the first live session on Wednesday. We're going to talk about elderflower, but also yarrow, two of the most important herbs to know about in terms of managing and preventing actually common household ailments. Yarrow is one of my most favorite herbs in the world. It's phenomenal. So that's why willow bark is so astonishing. It's so amazing. And there's a fascinating history to willow, which is worth just briefly discussing. So the famous Reverend Stone, William Stone. So he was a Church of England vicar, priest, in the 17th century, just outside Oxford. And back then, the clergy were the priests and monks were very much the GPs and the herbalists, the village herbalists of their time, because they were educated, They were literate. They were well versed in medicine, and particularly the monks, we know, were incredibly skillful at herbalism. And they had an encyclopedic knowledge of foraging. And Reverend Stone was, responsible for looking after not just the spiritual health of his parish, but also the physical health. When people got sick, when they got injured, when they were ill, it was to the priest they turned. And Reverend Stone, by all accounts, was very good at that. But then he came across a French pilgrim who said, "Why are you using the herbs you're using to manage pain?" Back then, most of his parish were working in agriculture, very, very, physically demanding jobs, labor intensive, physical labor. So there were loads of injuries, back problems, joint problems. Pain was endemic, and this French pilgrim was like, "Well, why are you using that when you've got a huge willow tree there, which is the most effective painkiller you'll ever have?" And Reverend Stone was, "Well, teach me why. What do you mean this tree is a painkiller?" And the French pilgrim um, taught him about how to use willow bark, and he started prescribing it and administering it. And what he found was that within about a week of using that as his primary medicine, the impact he's having was about two-thirds more effective. As in terms of reducing pain, in terms of treating inflammation, in terms of treating colds and flu, and the body aches and things like that. And that we now know why, because what he'd stumbled across was the original form of aspirin. Because aspirin that we now go to the supermarket to buy is made up of something called salicylic acid. And the salicin that makes up that medicine comes from where? It comes from the bark of the willow tree. So salicin and salicylic acid, which is found in very high concentrations in the bark of the willow, is one of nature's most powerful pain modulators. Because we can think of herbs like turmeric, and and birch leaves, lots of other painkillers, or not painkillers, but herbs that are used for pain. They're not actually analgesic, they're anti-inflammatory. They reduce inflammation, which is really important, but that's not the same as reducing pain. So what willow bark offers us is an analgesic. It is a clinically proven painkiller. So, and the beauty of this is we can look at the research and know why it works. So we have compounds in our body, things that are called prostaglandins, something called lipooxygenase, cyclooxygenase. These are the chemicals of pain. And we know that willow bark is able to clinically suppress those pathways and those inflammatory pathways. And in doing so, induce a clinically significant reduction in both the severity of pain and also the prevalence of pain. So we know that when we're using willow bark, it reduces pain severity, acts as an analgesic, a painkiller. It's a very powerful anti-inflammatory. It's a brilliant antipyretic. So it lowers fevers. It's brilliant for colds, flus, tonsillitis, sinus congestion, throat infection, seasonal colds and flu. It's brilliant. So in having access to this, we've got a wild medicine that is available 12 months of the year. We can forage it, we can harvest it, we can prepare it 12 months of the year. But now is the most important time. April and May is the most important time, and I'll talk about why in a second. So, what are the clinical indications for using willow bark? Pretty much a who's who for why you would use Nurofen, paracetamol, or aspirin. So whether any kind of musculoskeletal pain, any type of nerve pain, any type of body aches and symptoms that come from infections. So it's fantastic for arthritis, rheumatic pain, gout, sports injuries, sore muscles, aching muscles. All aches and pain, sciatic pain, back pain, lower back pain, pulled muscles, headaches, particularly tension headaches. It's brilliant for tension headaches. It doesn't really work for migraines. It's not strong enough for the intense pain of a migraine. But for things like tension headaches, frontal headaches, just general headaches, it's astonishingly good. Um, it's very, very good for the long-term management of inflammatory problems. So carpal tunnel syndrome, bursitis, tendonitis, all of these kinds of things. Sprains, strains, very good for respiratory infections, for treating the body aches. When you've got a cold or a flu, your whole body hurts and it's kind of just painful and sore. It's great for bringing that down. It's great for clearing congestion, for clearing the respiratory symptoms of cold and flu. It's brilliant for menstrual cramps, menstrual discomfort. It goes on and on and on and on. Okay, so anything where we would think Nurofen, paracetamol, ibuprofen, this would be clinically indicated. And the beauty of this is that the evidence is so robust. We know it's not a case that there's some herbs that you just know are going to work, and this is one of them. And I don't want to make it out as a panacea for all pain, but I was talking to Holly about it this morning actually, and I was saying, well, if we're gonna if we're gonna advocate this, what kind of prevalence can we put on it in terms of success? And we were trying to just think about it longitudinally across a year, and I genuinely would say that over a year, this can be used about 70 to 80% of the time. The willow bark is enough. There is maybe 20% of the time where you need something that's more heavy-handed, a pharmaceutical like Nurofen or like cocodamol or paracetamol, whatever it is, where this needs that little bit extra. Because synthetic pharmaceuticals are obviously more powerful and there's a place for them. I've used them. I had a really bad lung infection a year ago, actually, last May. And I know that because it was the 1st of May, because I had it. Those of you, I know lots of you, and I'm very grateful, I bought my new book. That book had to be submitted to the publisher on the 1st of May. And I came down with this really bad lung infection about 4 days before that. And I remember having to finish this book up feeling like death. Um, and in that case, I resorted to Nurofen because I just needed a little bit extra. But the majority of the time, definitely over 70, around 80% of the time, I use willow bark. We use willow bark, Holly, myself, family, friends, and it does the job. So if you're reducing your intake of over-the-counter painkillers by 70 to 80% over any given week, month, year, particularly in cold and flu season, that's profound. It's a profound gain. So it's really important to know about. It's really important to have this in your home apothecary. So there are some precautions with this. So because it works in the same way as aspirin, if you're on blood thinners, if you're on prescription blood thinners like warfarin, then I would stay clear of willow bark. There are other herbal painkillers that are available through the year, and we'll talk about those. We'll cover those as we progress through the year in the Wild Medicine Mastery course. So if you're on blood thinners, don't use willow. If you suffer with any bleeding disorders, if you're at risk of bleeding disorders, then obviously don't take willow bark. And willow bark mustn't be used by under 18s or if you're pregnant or breastfeeding. So this isn't for our little ones or our children. Again, there are alternatives for that, but this is for adults only. Okay, so 3 really important safety things to be aware of. So blood thinning prescriptions, if you've got bleeding disorders, if you're under 18, pregnant or breastfeeding. So 5 things that are absolutely sacrosanct and vital to know about. So how do we use this? Um, Classically, so what there's about, I think there's about 100 and I think the top of my head, I think there's 133 different types of willow tree around the world. If you buy willow bark from a dispensary, if you go onto an online a licensed herbal dispensary, and you buy willow bark, it will almost always come from the white willow. That's the one that contains the highest concentration of salicin. So it's the most powerful form of willow. But all willow, weeping willows, white willows, black willows, they're all safe to use, and they all contain clinically significant volumes of salicin. So any willow you can use. So to actually harvest the medicine, you need branches about that thick. So if you compare that to my finger, it's equal to or less than a finger width. And you never want to take more than about a foot from any one branch. So the beauty of willow is that they hang down. They have these, they're always around, they're kind of often touching the floor, aren't they? But they're often head height. So you haven't got to worry, well, how do I get them? Because they're up in the air. They're easy to find and they're easy to forage. So you want to cut about a foot, 12, 16 inches of one branch as a maximum, so you don't damage the branch in its entirety. So cut off, and that's actually really good for the tree. Cutting off those is pruning. It's essentially you're pruning the tree. So if you cut off, about 10, 15, 20 of those, in terms of the volume of the tree, that's completely insignificant, unless it's a very young tree, in which case try and find a bigger tree. But where I got this from, what this one from, the tree is about 30 foot tall. It's a massive willow. I took about 15 or 20 of those. It's completely insignificant to the tree. It's good for the tree. So it will come with the leaves on like that. Strip all the leaves off until you're left with the bark. And then what you need to do, and I've got a video, we've got a video which we'll upload to the resources page that shows you how to do this in detail. But what you need to do is get a sharp knife. It's a really good tool for the forager. So in the Wild Medicine Mastery course, it has a whole section about tools of the trade. And secateurs are really good. You don't want to tear this, you don't want to snap it off the tree or tear it, because that increases the risk of infection in a tree. You want a nice clean cut. So you want a pair of sharp secateurs, a really sharp knife. And all you need to do is score all the way down the length of the bark, and what will happen, it will peel off like that. Peels off. So that's the wood, that's the bark. So it peels off in one piece. It's almost like nature intended it to be used as medicine, because if you try and peel an oak tree or an oak branch, it all comes off in piecemeal, whereas this comes off in one beautiful bit. And then what you have to do, so the salicin is on the inside. So that's the outer bark, which is fine to use. But the actual salicin is in the white bit inside. So that's the medicine. So all you would do, imagine you had loads of those. So you had 15, 20 lengths of, 12, 16 inches of branches. You would then just cut those up into little inch pieces like that. So you would have loads of little bits like that. And then you would dry those. You can make fresh tea out of them, but ideally you dry them. So you've got a big jar filled with dried willow bark. And again, there's detailed instructions on how you do that. So the bark is the medicine. Once you've peeled it off, the tree is the branch has no further value to you as a herbalist. Obviously, you can make loads of things with willow in terms of baskets and supports and things like that. But as a medicine, that's done with. So that it's the bark that is used. So you'll get a video about how to do that, and you'll get instructions around how to dry it. Um, but sorry, but you want to do this now, because so if it was January now and someone in your household had a really bad flu and body aches and whatnot, you could go out, find a willow tree, cut off some branches, have that, and prepare it into a really effective medicine. And you can do that 12 months of the year. But when the sap is rising, so now as the willow trees are coming into bloom, all the leaves are out, the sap is rising. The salicin concentration in willow bark now, up until probably for the next 4 weeks, early June-ish, is about 30% higher, which is a massive gain in terms of clinical impact. So one of the absolute priorities for me, which is why I was out this morning. I've got loads. I probably got, well, I've got, like I say, probably 15, 20 sections, which I've got to prepare today. Um, is to get, I typically want about two, at least two big kilner jars with dried spring willow bark. And I'll save that for actual clinical need. So when people, if someone is actually in pain, they're really suffering, they're unwell, and that's for use in in actual when it's needed. And then if I need something less urgent, you can just forage fresh ones. So one or two dried cleaner jars of spring willow bark is really important. And what I want to talk about today is how to make a hot decoction. A decoction is different to an infusion, because it's the simplest and easiest way of using it. But there's also a brilliant a massage oil. So it uses willow bark, fresh rosemary, and if you have it, a couple of drops of frankincense essential oil, which is a powerful painkiller. And you make it into this beautiful topical massage oil. And it's one that I use a lot. I do lots of downhill mountain biking and always injuring myself. And I use that loads. You warm it up, get out of a bath, have a hot bath so all of your pores open, get out of the bath, warm it up, and massage it into sore muscles, aching muscles, tired muscles, bruises, strains. And it's just the most phenomenal topical painkiller. And I actually learned from about that from one of the kind of, it was a very old man um in Croatia. And he was teaching me about how they use willow and these kinds of things. And it's a beautiful remedy. It's also great as a herbal bath. I'm going to try and do a bonus session possibly on something called transdermal therapy, which is the absorption of medical compounds through the skin in herbal clinical herbal baths. So willow bark is brilliant for that. And I also think that one of the things that's important, and one of the things that I always have, is strong willow bark tincture, which is which is the most powerful way of administering willow bark. It's the most concentrated and powerful way of absorbing the salicin and the pain-killing properties. Um, so there are lots of ways of using willow. Again, all of those bottom remedies and all the videos and whatnot and instructions are in the full course, in the Wild Medicine Mastery course. But they're too much to cover all of those in this course, because obviously that it's great to be able to dive into that in more detail. So those of you who have joined, check those ones out. And I would definitely recommend making the massage oil. But today I want to talk about the decoctions, because it's the simplest, fastest, and very effective way of using willow. So what is a decoction? So a decoction is a tea that is simmered. So an infusion is used for the aerial or weaker parts of a plant. So if you put elderflowers, or you put dandelions, or you put nettles into a cup and pour over boiling water to make a tea, an infusion, that's going to be really effective, because the herbs are the herbs you're using are soft. They're leafy, they're botanically vulnerable. They haven't got any protection. But the medical compounds in them transfer into the water really effectively. But when you're using the hard or protective parts of a plant, like nuts, roots, seeds, barks, the really botanically hard parts, if you put that willow bark into a cup and pour over boiling water and let it infuse for 10 minutes, it's going to go a very light red color. It's not going to be anywhere near strong enough to induce a clinically significant pain killing response. So, because of that, you have to boil it. And another great example of this, one of the herbal medicines that I think very few people use in Britain, foraging wise, it's used endemically in France, is conkers. Conkers are powerful medicines. They've got really useful benefits. And when it gets to the conker season, we'll have a session about that in the longer course. And again, you have to boil it. So when you're making a decoction, what you would do is imagine that you chop that into small pieces. So you've got loads of bits like that. and you would put about 2 heaped teaspoons of that into a saucepan and pour over about 1.5 cups of cold water. You would then put that on the hob and bring it to a boil, a really aggressive boil. And then once it's boiled, turn the heat down to the lowest setting and put a lid on so that all of the vapor is contained. And you need to simmer that for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then what you'll find when you take the lid off, that water is turned, it looks like blood. So although the willow bark so the outer bark is dark green, and the inner bark, which is where the salicin is white, the tea actually makes this really deep scarlet red water. It looks like it looks like blood. Actually, one of the colloquial names in France is dragon's blood. And you want it to be this super red, super concentrated decoction. And then you would obviously pour that into a cup. By then, it's probably reduced to a cupful because you've simmered it. Let it cool down to drinking temperature. You're adding a teaspoon of raw honey is really good because it's anti-inflammatory, and then drinking 1 cup every couple of hours, maximum of about 4 to 5 cups a day. If you're doing it for someone, it makes sense to do it all in one go. So making 4 cupfuls, get a big saucepan and make 4 cupfuls. So 8 teaspoons of bark, and then increase the water and make one big batch, and then you can just pour it into a flask or just keep it on the side and just reheat it as you need it. So it's just less faff because you haven't got to do it 4 times. So whenever I've used this, particularly for colds and flu, make a big batch, stick it in a flask, and you can add loads of things to this. You could add ginger, you could add some cloves, you could add some rosemary, you could add some dandelion, you could add some birch leaves because they're very anti-inflammatory. So you can really get creative with this. Um, so one of the absolute priorities, I would say, as part of this week, and if you're really, if you feel really motivated to take on that mantle of the village herbalist or the home herbalist, then and become that person who can use herbs to transform health and prevent disease and treat common household ailments, having the knowledge to find, harvest, prepare, dry and prescribe willow bark is a must-have skill. So a priority is to get a couple of jars filled with dried bark so that you've got that all year. And then try and this weekend, maybe again, it's looking like it's going to be beautiful weather, particularly in Britain. I know we've got people all over the Europe, but try and find a willow tree, try and harvest some, and try and prepare some and make the tea. Even if you're not in pain, just make it, and try it, because it's a beautiful tea. You don't have to use it medically. You don't always drink mint tea for a clinical reason. You drink mint tea because it's nice. You can use this as a sipping tea, anti-inflammatory, loaded with vitamins and minerals. It's really good for you. So you have a go of drinking it. It's a really good experiment. So a very, very, very important foraging herbal priority is willow bark, which is why I wanted to obviously have this session. Okay, so you also uploaded will be the video for how to actually prepare the bark, and the instructions for how to dry it. If there's any questions about that, obviously let me know in the Facebook page. Those of you who've joined the Wild Medicine Mastery, do check out I would specifically signpost you to the rosemary, willow, and frankincense massage oil because that is game changing. Any questions, let me know. Have a lovely, lovely day. Have a lovely bank holiday. We've got some more bits and pieces to release over the weekend. We've got some different things to share with you guys. And like I said, we've got that amazing recipe bundle we're uploading to the Wild Medicine Mastery tomorrow. So do have a go of making all of that. Thank you for being here. Again, 200 people live. Absolute privilege. So super grateful. Have a lovely, lovely, lovely day. And I will be in touch later on with some different things to share. But have a great day. See you soon. Cheers, guys.